Wake at Night series by Glenn Cawley. It's a series of lessons, or questions, I should say, a series of questions that have been turned in that elderships have struggled with or have tried to figure out a way to answer, and they have made an attempt in the book to answer the questions for those folks. So that's what Jonathan and I have been going through, and then Don has been doing his Answering the Era series, so that gives us a little bit of mix of different things. So this morning I've got a couple of questions, and I went through and picked these questions out a few weeks ago, and I wrote the answers to these questions then. So I made a little note here to kind of go over before we get started. It's important to remember as we go through these questions, we're answering questions as it is, and even a small change in the facts could make the answer change accordingly. So we've got to remember as we answer these questions were written or asked by a specific congregation with a specific circumstances, and the questions aren't always all-inclusive, so we have to take the question for what it is and answer the question in that way. The other thing I realize is that Jonathan and I answer these questions, two things about that. There's no way to answer these questions as they come to us and then talk to them from the perspective that we're answering them about this congregation that we don't know without interjecting our thoughts about you guys, because we're the shepherds, you guys, and we know you guys, and we think of you guys when these questions come up. So it's a mixture of how we should answer the question for the congregation that this is intended for, as well as how to answer this question so maybe that'll be meaningful for you since you're our congregation. So Jonathan and I are answering those in that way. The second thing is like we talked about recently, this is not something that we spend time as a group with the three of us talking about how to answer these questions. So when Jonathan and I give our answers, it'll be answers that Jonathan and I, from knowing the eldership and knowing the congregation, how we assume that the eldership would answer the question. So with that in mind, you have to realize that if there's a small change to the question, and it's actually something that we're dealing with here in person, then the three of us are going to meet, we're going to discuss it, and a small change could make a different direction in how we would answer the question. So bear that in mind. Hopefully that makes sense as we go through and we talk about these questions. So realize that. Our first question, maybe that's big enough that you can see it okay. I tried to get it all on one slide. It's case 80 in the book, and it's titled, Keeping a Secret from the Church. And in this question, they've named the individuals in the question a different name than the actual name, so that there's no way anybody could figure out, who is the question's pertaining to. So the question says this: a Christian whose name is Bill from the congregation in the town near ours came to our elders meeting to ask a favor. His brother-in-law, Tom, 50 years old, has just been released from prison and wants to start attending with us. Out of consideration, Bill has come to us to give us the man's history. The problem is that Tom is a registered sex offender due to this. And when it says due to this, the next statement gives you the reason why he's a registered sex offender. It says 20 years ago, he served 10 years in prison for raping his ex-wife. Bill doubts whether Tom actually committed the crime, but says it's a possibility. He was drinking a lot then. Bill thinks Tom is harmless now and wouldn't be a threat to anyone in our congregation. Naturally, we want Tom to be saved, and we will welcome him. But we need to let me read that again. Naturally, we want Tom to be saved and we'll welcome him, but do we need to disclose to the church that Tom is on the sex registry? So this is really the question. The question is not about any of the information. The information is just what he brought to them. But this is the actual question. Do we disclose this to the congregation? Is what he's asking. And here's the reason he's asking. He says, if we do, it may very well create an atmosphere that will force Tom to leave. If we don't, we run the risk that someone in the church might learn and feel that we had not properly protected them. What should we do? So the question is the information is put before them, and they're wanting to know, do we tell the congregation or do we not tell the congregation? Well, there's a lot of layers to this, and you have to peel it back a little bit to really understand where you need to go with this. Before we answer the question, I want you to think about this. You'll find as an elder, when you serve as an elder, some of the decisions that you make are a matter of judgment and expediency. It's not necessarily a matter of salvation. And this question falls under the matter of judgment and expediency. This question falls under that category because it's how we would protect the flock, not only spiritually but physically And you have this gentleman's soul in mind too, because he's obviously not a Christian based on the question. So here's the thoughts on the question in the book, and I'm not going to go through the whole question in the book. And you'll find when you go through and you read this, and it's just like you're answering it for a generic congregation you don't know, but when you look at it from the perspective of knowing this congregation, you're not only always going to agree with every answer in the book, in this book. And basically in the book, it says not to tell the congregation because they would treat this individual differently and be afraid of him, which could run him off. The book says to have a man or some of the men shadow him anytime he's with the congregation and to keep an eye on him. So I don't think that's the right approach for us here at Cookeville. I'm not taking exception to what Glenn put in the book. That's put together by men that consulted Glenn's. I really love Glenn and his preaching and his teaching. I don't want to take exception with that because Glenn is answering it the way he needs to answer it based on the conversations that he had with men around him for a generic conversation. But standing before you, I can't say that that's the advice that I would give you, in our scenario here. And this is my opinion as one of three. Why I say that, it may be a great approach for that congregation, but I don't like it, especially as many children and young girls and ladies that we have here at this congregation. And here's my thoughts on how to answer the question with our congregation in mind. I'm going to be fairly specific with this and why we had a very similar situation pop up here since we've been organized here together as a group. And there's maybe, outside the eldership, maybe 4 of you that knew about it, that I know of, and the rest of you didn't know about it because we handled it without you having to know about it. And that gives a different twist for this to me. And as we go through the question, you can think about that. There was very few people that had to be involved in it, and you'll understand why as we go through the question and we explain it a little bit. And this young man that we wound up talking to, the end result was that he was not allowed to come here, but that didn't mean we kicked him to the curb. We were interested and cared about his soul. The gentleman that helped him steered him in the right direction, and then the rest is up to him. And without giving you any more details, as we go through this, bear in mind that not only is this a question that comes to us about a generic conversation, but we've actually dealt with something very similar here, amongst ourselves. As an elder, our first priority above all else in situations like this should be to protect the congregation that we are already responsible for to God. Second to that would be the teaching and converting of this individual. And it's a close second. We should never lose sight of the fact that these individuals need to be taught the gospel. I mean, that's the purpose of what we're supposed to be doing as Christians. A couple of things to notice about the question. In the question, it indicates that this man is not a Christian because they hope for him to be saved. So that tells us that he's not a Christian. He's coming for the purpose, he's not coming for the purpose of worship because he don't understand what that is since he's not a Christian yet. He's coming to visit to figure out what we're about and hopefully be taught as we get to know him. From the question, we learn that he was drinking heavily when the offense occurred. So not only did he have a sexual offense, but he was also a heavy drinker at that time, even admission by his own family member. Things to notice. The question says, and this is a confusing one, as you read the question and look at it on the screen behind me, as I was reading through the question, the way the question is worded is a little confusing. The question says that he's just been released from prison, but it's confusing when it says 20 years ago he served 10 years, which makes it sound as if he's been out of prison for a few years, but it says he was just released. So there's no way to clear that up without having a conversation with the people involved. But it doesn't really change the basis of what they're trying to ask about the question. It's usually the problem with people who are sexual offenders that the information you get is typically incomplete. It's often incomplete, if not most of the time. The man asking the question says in the question that he thinks Tom will not be a threat to anyone in the congregation, or the man that was giving the information to the elders that asked the question, I guess, thinks that Tom would not be a threat any longer to anyone in the congregation. It has also been my experience that the family is almost always the last one to see the person for who they really are. So we should never take that as someone's word that would cause us to set a course of action and assume that it's accurate. The first thing we would need to do is look him up on the sex offender registry, and there's often at least some details of his offense. And the rest of what I'm about to tell you here with this part here, when you've got a hunter that goes to church with you, this part gets really easy. All you have to do is give a little bit of information to him, and it's all out there, public record, and you can go see it. We would also do an online search and see what records we could pull up, possibly even from his judicial hearing. Did you know that you can go and read judicial hearings? Oftentimes, it's public record. It would give us court documents, and we could hear the charges that were brought against him and how the case was argued. Oftentimes, all these records are public record and can be viewed online. When people are convicted of a sexual offense, they have restrictions that are placed on them for who they can be around, places they can be around, where they're allowed to go or not allowed to go. But did you know that religious institutions are not part of those restrictions? You know, I didn't realize that until we had a situation like this come up some time back, and I got to looking, and I thought, well, all the women and children, that'll take care of itself, but it does not. In Tennessee, at least, they don't restrict a person's attendance in a religious institution based on that. So a person that is a sex offender is allowed to walk in and sit in a congregation with women and children all around them when they would not be allowed to go close to a school or any other facility with women and children. It's just the way the law is written, and I imagine a lot of that is written that way so that it doesn't infringe on our religious rights as individuals, but that's one of those times when the law gets complicated and it overlaps in places that maybe it shouldn't. So that's a long conversation that we could get way off on. So once we had gathered all the information we thought we could have access to and had time to process that, we would contact him and have a conversation directly with the individual. We would invite him to sit down with us privately and to discuss the possibility of him worshiping with us. And it doesn't, in this scenario, have to be the three elders that do that. It could be a couple of trusted deacons or trusted men of the congregation. That's the situation that we had when we had this come up. And they talked with this individual and found out his information. We don't want to intimidate him or treat him unfairly. It's hard to, when you're talking with someone like this that has worldly issues, that wants to come in and worship amongst us, it's hard if you have a strong personality to meter that personality to the point that you don't seem aggressive. I made up a new word. You don't seem aggressive or abrasive to this individual in a way that would make them feel unwelcome, but you have to be stern in a way that they understand that you won't be someone that they can push over or walk on top of, because many of them are wise, worldly. You can imagine with me being a contractor for so much of a part of my life, I've dealt with many of these individuals that have offenses that they can't get jobs other places, or they have drug issues or things that cause us to have to deal with that. Now, we don't hire people that have these issues, but the people that we hire oftentimes will bring them in as laborers or day laborers or common workers, and we have to police that very heavily, and I've learned to see the signs of that very quickly, and sometimes it makes me a quick judge of that, and I have to meter myself not to be too quick of a judge of it, but I can see it. Sexual offense, a lot harder to see. You don't know that. And there's been times that there's been people that I went and looked up or had Hunter to help me, and we found things about folks, and it's beneficial to have this. And knowing that it's all public record, it is not an invasion of this individual's privacy. When they do something in a public way and they're arrested and they're prosecuted and they're done, processed by the laws of the land, that's their fault for getting in that situation, and they lose the ability to have that privacy. And if it's public record, we can read that. That's why it's there. So at this point in the conversation, what we read online almost never matches what the individual says when he's questioned about it. The rare instance it will match, and a person has done something that he realizes he shouldn't have done, and he has remorse and repents, and it will match, but it's been rare. And that's usually the problem with people that are sex offenders. The information you get is always incomplete or different than public record or testimony. What we find in our investigation and how the conversation with him goes, will weigh very heavily on whether or not we would consider allowing him to attend here with us. If what we find proves too risky to allow this individual to attend with us in person, we would offer to set up studies with him in person, obviously with a couple of men sitting down with him and trying to study, because after all, it's our responsibility to try to convert this person. We would also offer to seek out a congregation that had a demographic that would be better suited for a person with sexual offense. It's hard to imagine that working out well in a congregation as many women and children that we have here at our congregation. It's not impossible to rehabilitate a person that is a sexual offender, but it's difficult. And usually there's something going on in that person's brain that's hard to reach with common reasoning. And, each case is individual, and you can't make a blanket statement because it does happen. And people make mistakes when they're younger, or they can be accused of things that maybe weren't necessarily exactly how it all came out. So you have to be very careful. That's why the discussions and the reasoning and talking about those things is very important. That's why the honesty of the individual is very important. And if it doesn't match public record, then why? There has to be a really good excuse for that. If he's not willing to meet with us at all, and he doesn't want to talk to representatives of this congregation, if he's not willing to do those steps, and we can't vet what we're seeing in front of us, then we would have to discourage him from attending and tell him that we would just have to steer him to a different congregation. This may seem very harsh to you, like we don't care about this man, but that's not the case. We love you more. I guess I don't know how else to say that. We're interested in you more. Our responsibility is more in every way of how we're supposed to watch for your souls, because this individual may not care about what we're offering here, how we're trying to worship. They may just be curious or want somewhere to be, and you've got to vet that out. It should be a priority to teach and convert him, but not at the expense of harming this congregation. There are other ways. There are other ways to help him. There are channels that you can help him through, and there's ways that there's help through the government, through the community, if everything lines up the proper way, that you can help this individual. So you can't just immediately assume that you're uncaring about someone's soul if you don't invite a sex offender to come in and sit with our children while they're sitting in the auditorium here close to our ladies. This is just not, in my opinion, the way to approach that. So that's a whole lot of talking about worldly related stuff and about sexual offense and all that. How does this relate to the scriptures? And as an elder, everything is not always clear cut. That's why I said this one is a matter of judgment. And the three of us would sit down together and we would hash it out between the three of us. We all have different personalities with the same goal. And between the three of us, we would figure out a way to handle this. But if you're looking for a verse, to me, that stood out in my mind when I saw this question, I thought of Ezekiel 33, 6 through 9. And, if you know this verse, and a lot of you know that when it's mentioned, these verses are talking about, starting in chapter 33 there, 6 through 9. It goes down through 33. And the verses are discussing a person that is selected to be a watchman for Israel, to watch for them so that they won't be attacked. And when you read these, it's a different context, but the context of these verses is talking about this watchman and sin and the warning for Israel and God's impending judgment. To me, although it's a different context, if the people are warned and they do not turn and their blood is on their own hands, but if they're not warned and the judgment comes upon them, then the people's blood is on the watchman's hands if he doesn't tell them. In this warning, to me, although the context is different, the principle is the same. I feel like I can't feel like that we wouldn't tell you, because I would feel like if something happened to one of you that I would feel responsible for that. So that's why I say the context of this, in my mind, very much goes along with what we're talking about. So it says in verse 6, starting in Ezekiel chapter 33, verse 6, it says, "But if the watchman sees the sword coming and does not blow the trumpet, and the people are not warned, and the sword comes and takes any person from among you or from among them, he is taken away in his iniquity, but his blood will require at the watchman's hand." So that's why I say an eldership is supposed to protect you, and we're fallible men. We're not always going to make the right decision, and we'll make mistakes. And if it happens, then we'll ask your forgiveness. But our first priority should always be the seriousness of trying to fulfill that commitment that we have to you. And that's why I say these verses, to me, relate to this. So back to the question. The other side of the coin is if we do not offer teaching and instruction to help this individual and we leave him in his sin voluntarily, then these verses would apply to us in Ezekiel just like it would apply to us if we don't protect you. It's a tough spot to be in, and one that needs to be navigated very carefully. So the answer would be to work with the individual privately first. Learn everything you could about them. Match it up with what you know and what you can see. And if it is thought that he could come and be with us in person, then you would have to be told as a congregation of this man's past or his background. And I think you deserve to know. Trying to fulfill both obligations is a tightrope that sometimes is hard to walk. So you know how I go about teaching this class. I don't often stop in the middle of it all, and I go through the question, and I go through my thoughts, and I go through the answer. So I want to open it up to you now to discuss this. And I'll take any question you have, or we'll talk about it any way that you want to talk about it. And you can disagree with me if you want, and we'll discuss that. That's how we learn in Bible class. Yes?
As you stated, number one, this sort of thing is a judgment call, and an eldership has to work through it. And so you stated your thought, if we were in a meeting, I think what I would offer, and then we would all work through it, is you've got to look at the person and see, are they a threat in any way? And if this person did this only when they were drinking, when a person drinks, they're somebody different. They do things they would not have done. And that's one of the evils and dangers of drinking. If a person was drinking, but he has been sober for 30 years, this is not a threat. And so if it was related to children, I would say it is a threat because he's got a propensity or desire for children.
That's a whole different mental place that a person's
at. It's a whole different, but that wasn't this question.
Right.
And so it means he came home, he wasn't in his right mind, and he got aggressive and sinned against his wife. But he wouldn't have done that had it not been for alcohol, and he never did it any other time except for alcohol, and he's been sober for 30 years. I would suggest we look at that and say, there is no threat there to the congregation. And so we would have to take it upon that basis. And then we would have to work through that and make a decision. Whatever decision we reached on that would not be a wrong one because the eldership has authority in the realm of judgment. And so, as people may or may not know, when you get into a question like this in the realm of judgment, the eldership will take it, we talk about it, we offer the different thoughts, and then we reach a conclusion that seems to be one that everybody can live with, and that's what we go with, and then it's binding. That's Hebrews 13:17. It becomes binding with the authority of God. But since there are different opinions, it might not necessarily be the one I thought was best, but that's the one the eldership works from. But if we were in such a meeting as that, that's the way I would say we've got to approach it.
Part of the last part of Don's answer goes back to, if you remember me saying in one of my other questions that I talked about, as an elder, you look out and you see your fellow elders and they are your elders too. So if their decision trumps your decision, you have to respect that, and it becomes binding like Don says. And when you step outside the meeting of the eldership, whether you like it or not, that's the consensus of the eldership, and you have to go with that. And those are hard things to do. And if you don't have humility and the love for the congregation to the depth that you should, those become a struggle, and they can be hard anyway. This is a hard question, and a lot of what Don talked about, those things would be vetted out when you sit and you talk with this individual. And to me, it would be hard to overcome a person that had committed an offense against a child. That's a different psyche, a different mentality. I don't know how you could get drunk enough to get there. Between him and his ex-wife, I don't know. And then one of my really big questions I would want answered is, you said this happened 20 years ago. He served 10 years, but he just got out of prison. There's 10 years missing there for me, unless I'm not reading the question right. That's why I put the question back up. To me, it seems like there's some time missing that I don't know where it's at in the question. Maybe I'm just not reading it right. So I wanted you guys to see it, and I wanted to tell you this. It's like I see time missing. And if he just got out of prison, what was he in for this time if that wasn't the 20 years ago? See what I'm saying? So there's still issues going on that we got to have answers to. I think Jonathan and then I think Josh had one.
So really what Don's explaining too is every scenario is going to be different.
Everyone, yes.
There's no way really to answer just from one scenario and this will apply across the board. Everything is going to be taken case by case.
Yeah.
But I think a big telling thing too,
Consequences that stay.
yeah, there's going to be expectations in certain areas. And so if we sit with somebody and we talk to them and say, okay, we're going to agree to let you come here, but here's going to be the stipulations. We're going to have somebody with you at all times. We do not want you downstairs where the kids' classrooms are at. Things like that. If the person kind of bucks at that, to me that's an indication of, okay, are they really serious about this or not? Because this is a new lifestyle. They're not willing to accept that, hey, we're going to look at things that way, then chances are that's an indication of we're going to continually have problems with this person over and over.
Yeah, and to Jonathan's point too, and usually I'd like to repeat these answers back to maybe anybody that's listening on the live stream. This one's harder to do because the answers are lengthier and I don't want to repeat it differently than it should be. So this one's harder to do, so hopefully you can hear some of the stuff if you're watching. But to Jonathan's point as well, I would add that if you've got a person that is interested in coming here and being with us, but they really struggle with adapting to being with us and have zero interest in a Bible study, what's he really interested in? Or she, it could be a she. What are they really interested in? So if they're completely uninterested in knowing anything about the Bible but just want to come here, that makes me question long term, what's the goal? So every little nook and cranny or fork in the road or whatever you want to say is going to change the approach a little bit or how you have to handle this individual. Like I said, this book is called Awake at Night for a reason. So, Josh.
I'll say there are two things about this. The first thing was going to what you were talking about with honesty is how much of the information they're giving. So the implication is the guy's not a Christian, and something I would want to know in the discussion is if there is a discrepancy in his statement. Sometimes that's the lawyer's doing. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the lawyer's asking him not to incriminate himself and say some things he shouldn't be saying, and so sometimes that might change the statement. The second thing was actually something Brooke noticed. It says that that he was guilty of raping his ex-wife. It doesn't say that she was his wife at the time. It could be the fact that this was coming back to a situation too. Yeah. Which would add a whole other layer of problem.
Yeah, and having that conversation with them and understanding, like, how did he come about raping his ex-wife? There is so many layers to that. Like, they could have been living back together again, or did he just drove to her house and kick the door down? I don't know. So there's so many layers to that you have to figure out to be able to answer this question properly. So in other words, if somebody wants to, if this guy showed up on a Friday night and talked to us and wanted, whatever he said his name was here, Bill. So if he wanted Bill to be able to come to worship with us on Sunday and we couldn't get together with him on Saturday, then we need to skip a Sunday because we need a little bit of time to figure this out. My dad used to have a sign up at his service station that said, "Bad planning on your part doesn't constitute an emergency on my part." Because Bill's in a hurry doesn't mean we have to be in a hurry. See what I mean? It's like sometimes when people put a question before you and you think, "Oh man, I got to figure this out," and you put a lot of pressure on yourself and you go fast and fast and you try to figure it out. Well, why are you doing that? Because Bill wants you to? Or the other guy that wants you to allow him to be here? Is that why you get in a hurry? No. You slow down and you take the time to figure out what you need to know, and then you make a good decision based on as much factual information that you can get. And it's still just a decision. It's a decision that's not necessarily directly driven by Scripture. You can't just open the book and find out, well, what do you do with this guy that's coming? You've got to use principles to figure it out. So, any other comments? Yeah. Yeah, when I looked at that, and I thought brother-in-law, and then I saw the other stuff in it, and I thought, well, that's how to figure that out without asking questions. How's he a brother-in-law? Is he the brother of the one that was raped, or is the guy married to somebody different now, and that's his new brother-in-law, but he knew him back that time ago? So you could get all these different combinations of scenarios that you could get, but that's also something like it's his brother-in-law. And a lot of times families struggle with seeing things like, easily. Anybody else? Pam? Let me get Pam, I'll come back to Monty.
Thing that the crux of the question is, do we keep it a secret?
Right.
I can't think of any scenario where we as a congregation, where you guys would keep that a secret from us. And that's what I was trying to understand. Not, I understand you saying maybe we're going to let them worship with us with stipulations.
Yeah.
But I don't think Don's saying that that scenario would be still a secret to us.
No.
Correct?
No, I don't see a scenario where we would not tell you. And I think all of you realize that it's a little different here. A lot of times you have elderships that are behind doors elders, and they make decisions, and they tell you the decision sometimes. And it runs more like a corporation with a board of directors that are overseeing a business. And that's more common probably than what we wish it was. But from the very beginning, we've not been that way with you guys. And sometimes maybe we tell you stuff that you wished you didn't know. But and we're all kind of in this together, and we're to shepherd you guys. And from our perspective, I've seen a lot of videos and things online about shepherds with sheep, and I haven't seen them doing it from their house. They're out there with them, and they know them. And, it's important to us to have an open line of communication. So I would say there's a lot of congregations that would ask this question this way because they're trying to decide if they're going to tell it or not. That's usually never a conversation between us. Now, how to present it is a conversation, and how much to tell you is a conversation, but it's not whether or not you're going to know. I think we had Monty was next.
I just wanted to add that the eldership, you have a responsibility to yourself and the congregation, because in that text you read, it says that I will set above a watchman for you. Okay? Mm-hmm. You're our watchman. Don's our watchman. Jonathan's our watchman. And you're supposed to blow the trumpet if something ain't right.
Yeah.
And
right.
when it can be contained outside the church, it should be. That's when you can come into the church.
Imagine balancing this scenario, knowing that your soul is in jeopardy of making a wrong decision. If you don't make the effort to teach and save this individual, judgment. If you don't tell the congregation and you bring somebody in and he hurts someone, judgment. If we can't agree between ourselves and it causes problems, judgment. It's like, that's what I said, there's a line, and you got to find that line. Joey.
This eldership is more open, excuse me, with a congregation than any I've ever known. And there was a situation that came up about something that could have been done, and the eldership said, well, because of this reason, we can't tell the congregation. Therefore, we're not doing it. And I thought, well, that really prioritizes their willingness and feeling to make sure the congregation is aware. They just said no because they couldn't tell the congregation. So no, we're not doing it. So that'll tell you how open that they are with the congregation. Really respectful.
So I had a list here for that. We have had something happen recently, and I think that's what Joey's referring to. And there was an issue with an individual that wanted to come here. That's a Christian. There was an issue with that individual that wanted to come here, and we said, if he does, then we will tell you. We weren't going to tell him he couldn't, but the stipulation is that we had to stand before you and tell you like we do. And they said, no, don't want any information given to him. And we said, based on that, you can't come. And he was arrested 2 weeks later. So we couldn't tell you, so we didn't allow him to come. It ain't that we don't care about him. It's just where we were. Don?
One more thought. When you go to Ezekiel 33 and you look at the idea of the watchman did not blow the trumpet every time he saw someone. He blew
True.
the trumpet if it was a threat.
True.
And so if he saw someone, who determined whether he was a threat? The watchman did. And so if he looked at someone and he thought, okay, well, that's some sellers, they're just coming to market, he's not going to blow the trumpet. If he looked at some sellers, and he's got to make an assessment every time, well, if you're going to equate the elders to the watchmen, they have to determine, is this a threat? And so they're going to look at this guy, and if they determine he is not a threat, just because of his past, if a person's got a criminal history, I don't think we have to get up and tell everything. We have to determine, is this person a threat to our congregation? And then that is the decision that the eldership has to make. That's what the question comes down to.
Yeah, it does. And, I wonder whenever we think about this analogy of the watchman in Israel, knowing how people are people, we're all people. I wonder if he ever blew the horn and then they found out, oh, it's not really a problem. And then everybody went back to what they were doing. It's you do the best you can with what you see coming, and you figure it out from there. Anybody else?
Because it relates to this, we were at a congregation in South Carolina where they had a registered sex offender in attendance. Without going through all the details, he met with the elders multiple times before coming to worship, and the decision was, ultimately, they told the whole congregation who he was. They had a whole set of conditions of him coming and worshiping, one of which he was not allowed in any room in the building without one of the elders in the room with him at any time. He was not allowed in the classrooms. He was not allowed to join in out of service events where the women and children would be, but men's fellowships and men's Monday morning meetings and stuff like that, he was welcome to all of those. So in that case, they did allow him to come worship, but there were some conditions, and he was agreeable to all the conditions. They let him know ahead of time, we are going to tell the congregation, and he was okay with that too. And then they asked the congregation for two things. One, be encouraging as he studies more, as he gets a better relationship with Jesus. And two, tell us if you see anything that makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah. When I think about this too, I think about sexual sin in general. If you look at the letter that was written to the Corinthians, they're a prime example of a group of people that had a lot of sexual issues. Idol worship, they had a lot going on in Corinth. It was a hub there where you had a lot of people that came and went, and there was a lot of stuff that could happen. And Paul even says at one point, as such as some of you were. So they were Christians now, and they put a lot of that life behind them. There's a lot of things that can get you on the sex offender registry. There's a lot of things that can get you there. Some of them smaller, some of them much worse. So it's a case-by-case analysis that we have to do, and that's why God has a plurality of elders. If you just had one man doing this and they were deciding everything, there would be mistakes made. I guarantee it that there would be. But with them being three of us, it's most of the time when we go in a room and sit down, we're on the same page. Part of the time we have to talk it through because we think things that each other maybe didn't think of. That's why there's three of us that are doing this instead of just one, and it's an excellent way to go about things. I'm not always right whenever I have an opinion about something, and sometimes our opinions can be skewed based on past experiences and things that you've had happen, and some things repulse us more than others, and we have more patience with some things than others, and you have to really step back sometimes and look at how you see things and make sure that you're seeing it with the eyes that God would choose you to have when you're looking at it, and that you look at Scripture, and that you always want to look to the Scripture to guide you. And sometimes it's hard to make a decision that you wish you could make differently because you would like to inflict your thought on it. And maybe that's not what God would have us do. So the plurality certainly helps with that and measures and meters that. Don.
This when you said, did the watchman ever give a false blow of the trumpet?
Yeah.
And it made me think it would be better to give a false alarm than to not alarm and to let somebody in. And elders have to be vigilant. You would rather be overly cautious than to make a mistake. And I've seen congregations split over this issue. If they felt like the elders knowingly put them in danger, it split the church because the eldership no longer has the trust of the congregation. Because they say, what happened? One congregation I'm thinking of in Georgia, they brought in a man who was a sex offender, and the eldership said, we're going to keep this quiet. And when the congregation found out, you let this man in amongst our kids and you did not tell us, they said, we no longer trust you. And about half the congregation left. And the elders, their mistaken judgment, they felt like the man wasn't a threat, but most of the congregation felt like he was, and they split the church.
Yeah, I mean, I could imagine that happening easily enough. I think about talking about the watchman again and blowing the horn accidentally or prematurely and then finding out everything's okay. And then you think about the example that I laid out of how we would try to approach things and all the discovery and the finding out and the discussions that would happen beforehand. That's kind of us sounding the alarm that we know we have to be on high alert with this individual. We have to ask a lot more questions than usual with the approach that we would take, but that's us being overly cautious and wanting to make sure that we get that right on the front end and not regret a decision that we made. Anything else? Well, obviously we don't have time for the next one. The next one is a much easier question and it'll go a lot faster, and it's talking about problems with elders' wives. So we'll bump through that one real quick. Take about, if I'd have had 5 minutes, no, I'm kidding. But sure enough, the next question is dealing with a question that comes from a preacher about problems that you have with a couple of elders' wives. So we're going to talk about that one. And, you can tell with us being willing to do this Awake at Night series, and we're not, as you would say in the country, we're not scared. And we'll talk about whatever. So we're going to discuss that the next time it's my turn to teach. So thank you for your attention, comments.